You are listening to KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank, your partner in possible.
What's going on, Chiefs Kingdom? Welcome to this episode of KCSN Draft Show. I'm BJ Kissel. We're hanging out with ESPN's Matt Miller, just like we do every week. It's always a little different style when we talk with Matt. Last week, I believe, was the best mock draft that you could come up with for the Kansas City Chiefs. We've listened and watched some of the interviews that we did at the East-West Shrine Bowl. But now there are a couple of weeks out from the draft, Matt. I want to know, what's the latest buzz? What's the latest rumors? What's going on? I'm excited to talk this show, and thanks to our friends from Miller Lite for making this possible. But Matt, what's the latest top buzz headline here as we sit on Thursday, April 13th, as we're recording this show?
Can we talk to Miller Lite and just brand this as the Miller Time segment? Can we do that? I mean, I feel like there's a natural crossover here. Like, they can send some cans to my house. You can put a little logo on here, and we'll call it even. We'll call it good. So latest buzz. Also, nice. You can go with a tie in there, like, with Miller Lite buzz. Okay, I'm done being a marketing expert now. I think
pretty good.
One thing, BJ, I mean, people who don't know me as long as you have, I did work in marketing for 5 years. And when I had the Stick to Football podcast, that was always like our running gag was we would come up with ideas while we were like sitting around drinking, doing a podcast, and then like forget them and fail to capitalize on them. So Miller Lite, if you're listening, throw me some free cases or something. Okay, back to football now. I think right now I will say the biggest thing that I'm spending time on is, and this is going to sound overly simplistic, but it's who will be drafted first overall. Because when the trade happened, when Carolina traded up with Chicago, let's start there. So Chicago has the first pick. We come out of the combine, and really at the combine, our good friend Ryan Poles starts telling everyone, hey, we will trade the pick. He does an interview with Peter King where he says, hey, we'll trade the pick. He does an interview with Albert Breer. We'll trade the pick. So they really did a good job of putting it out there. And I don't know if you've heard this or not. Originally, the plan was Houston would trade from pick number 2 to pick number 1. So they would just flip places. And then the Bears would trade pick 2 to the Carolina Panthers at 9. So the Bears would still end up at 9, but Houston would have pick 1. They could get Bryce Young. The Panthers would have pick 2, conceivably to take CJ Stroud. The Texans balked at that, the asking price or whatever. I don't know exactly what happened. Something happened, and maybe it was Houston coming out of the combine saying, you know what, we're actually good with whichever quarterback doesn't go first, so we don't feel like we need to give up the draft capital. That's very, very possible. But for whatever reason, it didn't happen. Carolina trades to 1. And I think ever since that moment, there was so much speculation that he was for CJ Stroud. Frank Reich's always had big quarterbacks. Josh McCown had made some comments when he was in the media before he got hired in Carolina about CJ Stroud, about bigger quarterbacks. So there was a lot of dot connecting. Over the last 4 or 5 days, those dots have started to disconnect. And so right now it's really, you're trying to figure out, and not because like you want to break the news and spoil the fun of that, the excitement of that first pick, because I'm still a draft nerd and I love the excitement of what's going to happen at number 1. And so you don't want to ruin that for people. But for those of us that work in the information business, I want my mock draft to be right. So you're spending a lot of time on, what will Carolina do? And we know it will be a quarterback at 1. And then there's a domino effect, BJ. If Bryce Young goes first to Carolina, do the Houston Texans like CJ Stroud enough to make him the number 2 pick? You would think, given the way their roster is right now, Davis Mills is, the starting quarterback right now penciled in. You would think they have to go quarterback. But there is, I think, a fascinating domino effect this year that we haven't seen in a while. We can go back to, 2021, we knew quarterbacks were coming off the board 1, 2, 3. Last year, we knew it was going to be pass rushers galore. And it was like they were pretty predictable drafts. So I think the fun part of this year is the speculation. Even 2020, 2019, you knew who the pick was going to be before we got there. I think you have to go back to 2018 when it was a day before the draft when all the Baker Mayfield will go first talk really started. So it's really interesting. And I know you want to know about the Chiefs.
Yeah.
We don't know who pick 1 is going to be right now. Pick 31 is impossible to predict right now.
We're going to get there. But the top of the draft is always fascinating. And the trickle down and how things start to shake out, especially with like the first 5 to 7 picks. And I'll tell you this, but it sets the course of what the entire first round is going to look like, because guys can start falling, and then once guys start falling, do certain position groups start having pockets that change from where you originally predicted they might be. And that's one of the things that I think both we could agree on, that Brett Veach and his staff have been so good at over the years, are figuring out those pockets of where guys are going to go. And those scouts that are just scouting the Chiefs roster, but they're scouting other rosters to try and, prognosticate where guys are going to be going in order to figure out who's going to be available to be able to spend their information or spend their time gaining the right information for these people and for these different players. So let's stay on quarterbacks. Let's stay at the top. We're going to get to the Chiefs here in a few minutes. But I've seen mock drafts, and I know some of these mock drafts people spend a lot of time and they really care about, and some guys just throw names out there and they care about their big boards more than that. When it comes to the quarterbacks, I've seen guys like Will Levis go in the top 4, top 3. You see, it's been all over the place, and now people are just throwing different mock drafts. You don't know if they actually believe that or if they're just trying to be different to gain some social engagement. But how do you see the top 4 quarterbacks kind of shaking out, and how many do you see going in the top 5, top 10? Like, if you had to guess right now on your latest, stuff, make sure you go check out ESPN and read all of Matt's stuff, but I don't want to take it all here. But how do you kind of see the top 10 shaking out as it relates to quarterbacks?
It's hard. So we think they'll go 1-2, right? Bryce Young, CJ Stroud. That's the latest as of Thursday morning at 8:51 a.m. That is the latest buzz, is that it'll probably go 1-2. It will at least go, two quarterbacks go in the top 3. I feel very comfortable saying that, because if Houston doesn't take a quarterback, Arizona will trade out at 3. There's a possibility that 4 quarterbacks go in the top 4, because Carolina could take one, Houston could take one, Arizona could trade, and then Indianapolis could take one. So I think you look right now at Carolina and Indianapolis have to take quarterbacks. They really truly have backed themselves into corners. Carolina traded up. They've already signaled we will take the quarterback. So 2 will go in the top 4. I'll tell you, on Anthony Richardson, the combine was like a rocket ship for him because of the interviews, the athletic testing, and the workout. It was really, really good. I think the buzz has come back down a little bit, not close to where it was pre-combine when he was thought of like a late first-round pick. And I think for Will Levis, it's kind of gone the opposite direction of, he was being talked about. If you go back pre-combine, there was a legit debate between Levis and CJ Stroud, who would be QB2, or for some people, QB1. I think now Levis's stock is cooled, considerably because of the interviews. You hear things like, he's a really good guy, but he's super tight. And that tightness in interview shows up on the field. And I think that's what people are worried about. So when you hear things like Will Levis is dropping, it's not because he's a bad person. It's not because he's interviewing, poorly necessarily. He's not saying the wrong things. I talked to one team that interviewed him, and they said he's actually trying too hard. They gave the analogy of, it's like a puppy that just wants to get the treat. They just want the praise. And that helped me. And then someone it kind of clicks and you're like, okay. But, you hear things like he's a perfectionist. He's kind of tightly wound. And BJ, you've been around enough professional athletes to know that sometimes that's not a good thing. Sometimes you want the guys that are a little more loose, confident. I remember interviewing Joe Burrow, and it was just like, he had not a care in the world, but he was engaging and he was funny, and like it hit all the markers. You left the interview wanting to keep talking to him. And I think with Levis, you're just hearing from teams that, I wish he was a little more laid back, or I wish he didn't try so hard. And again, the try hard part, it does show up on tape where, he got sacked a ton last year because he's waiting for things to open up. And so you try to find the correlation there, and it seems like there might be one, but I hope that Will Levis just gets a gigantic chip on his shoulder from this pre-draft process. And it's like, you know what? I am a perfectionist. I am a try-hard, and I'm going to work my ass off to prove my draft position wrong. And I think that's very possible for him. I do think he's wired that way. It might be like, okay, I see how it is, and then just goes on a rampage because someone doubted him.
Every time somebody talks about that exact thing, and I've told this story, and I apologize to everybody listening if you've heard me tell this story before, but the time that I knew with Patrick Mahomes, and not to make it about Patrick Mahomes or talking about the draft, but you talk about like being comfortable and being loose. I remember his rookie year when Alex Smith was starting, there was a basketball game going on in the locker room. Those guys would play basketball a lot, and they were playing knockout, or they played some game where it's kind of like knockout 3-pointer thing where they run around shooting threes and whatever. And I just remember, I can't remember who his teammate was. It may have been like Chris Jones. It was like Chris Jones and Colin Saunders and Justin Houston was playing in this. And it was down to like the last shot. It was like a baseline shot. And it was Justin Houston and Patrick Mahomes. And Justin shot and missed. And then it was Patrick's turn. And they were like going fast, like trying to get all these shots off. And he was so cool, calm, and collected. He shot it, and as the ball's in the air, just holds his hand up, just kind of like pimping it a little bit, and drained it. And then just kind of like, he didn't get in Justin's face, but he kind of like let him have it a little bit. And I remember thinking like, so first round rookie who it's not playing,
never
right now.
playing.
That's Justin Houston. And it wasn't like disrespectful. It was just like, okay, like you see a little glimpse of put him in a competitive environment and he's comfortable with his ability. And granted, he's a very good basketball player. But I'll always remember that. I've told that story before of like, this guy was confident in his ability, but has that fine line of being confident, not overly cocky, and his teammates gravitate towards that kind of vibe. And I think that's why like him and Travis Kelce kind of have that. And I think it's probably why they get along, why they're so close, is they're very similar in that way. But I want to ask specifically, I know you talked about Anthony Richardson a little bit, because he seems like of the quarterbacks we've talked about in the top four, and with Levis to some extent, but Richardson's been all over the place. And I bring it up because, and I respect all the work that Kent Swanson, Matty Lane, and all the contributors to the KC Draft Guide do. They have Anthony Richardson as their number one player in this draft. And so I don't think they're the only ones who have that, but they are higher on him than a lot of other people. Is his, in your opinion, is he very much I would say boom or bust? It's such a cliche to use, but you talk about if he's interviewing well and he's got all of the physical abilities, is it a coach just saying, you know what, I can get the most out of him, and he checks the boxes that we need, even if what we see on tape sometimes concerns us? What is the reason, I guess I'm asking you, that you feel like there's such a disconnect with some people as far as his evaluation and what he might project at the NFL level?
I think it goes back to what can you fix? You know, what can be corrected? When I was coming up in scouting, there was this belief that you couldn't fix accuracy. You know, it was this innate skill. You either had it or you didn't. And it was unfixable. You know, you could change a lot. You could change mechanics. You could change, you know, like the launch point of the ball. You could almost change anything but accuracy. Then Josh Allen comes around, and you see
Josh
changed everything. I mean, we've talked before, Mahomes changed everything from you can't play in the air raid, you got to have like pocket mechanics, you can't throw off your back foot. Patrick changed that completely. Josh changed you can't fix accuracy, because I remember, like, I went to Iowa to scout Josh when he was at Wyoming playing the Hawkeyes. It was like the opener, that 2018 season, and watched him throw. And I had two guys with me who helped, and one, my brother Mello, who used to do the podcast with me, was like, I've never seen someone that athletically gifted at the quarterback position. The other guy who was with us was like, I've never seen a more inaccurate quarterback. He was like, I'm done with him. You know, he's just inaccurate. And so I was like, well, like, but we see accurate throws. So like, what if you could just do that all the time? You know, it's like the Happy Gilmore thing of like, wait, I don't have to putt if I just get it. Like, I'm just going to do that every time. And so for Josh Allen, it was, okay, why are you inaccurate? Is it boiling that down? So what we find is, it's tying his feet and his head to his eyes. You know, it's lining things up. It's the anti-Patrick Mahomes, where Patrick can be like looking over here, throwing over here, and it's accurate. You know, for guys like, for everyone else in the world, and BJ, you were a pitcher, you know this, you got to be lined up. And so I think for Anthony Richardson, it's the same thing. Like, we got to get you lined up, and to make sure everything's going at the same speed. Sometimes his feet get ahead of his arm, or vice versa. So, but, you know, there are times where you see it. You know, we saw it, the Georgia game this past year, you see it, you know, and there are definitely times you're like, oh, damn, just, okay, do that every time and you're going to be great. So I think, to go back to your original question, is there are people who believe, hey, he's capable of fixing that. And when he does, he's going to be dangerous. I think there are other people who say, we don't have time to let him fix that, so we got to go a different direction. You know, if you are the Indianapolis Colts and you've just been throwing Band-Aids on a surgically repairable wound, you don't have time probably to wait on Anthony Richardson. I have started pushing back on that a little bit because I think people forget Josh Allen played as a rookie and they threw him out there. And obviously they had Brian Dable and they had Kenny Dorsey and they had a group that could help him. But I think if you have a staff that can carry a guy and say, hey, we're going to throw a little bit at you each week and we're going to build this thing, because he's very intelligent. And he's, obviously incredibly athletic. So I think you can throw a lot at him. So it is fascinating. He could be the 3rd pick or he could be the 18th pick. It's really hard to nail that down because, and you said it yourself, it's boom or bust. I don't know that it's so much bust for him. I don't think he's like Josh Rosen. If it doesn't hit immediately, he's out of the league or anything. It's more like if he doesn't, it's boom or average, because the way the game's changing, his running ability and his arm strength is going to keep him around for a while.
Yeah, from us knowing each other over the years, I would always take the quarterback who is accurate over anything else. And I didn't like Josh Allen for the same reason. I'll admit it now, because I had said same thing you did. No quarterbacks get more accurate by the time they get to the NFL. The windows become smaller, the game becomes faster, the DBs are more athletic, the schemes are more, multiple in what they do and how they disguise things. And I can't get a handful of throws, even right now, as you brought it up. I hear Josh Allen and accuracy. I think of the Senior Bowl, watching him throw routes on air and throwing post routes into the second row of the stands. He did that 3 times with no I think a couple of them were one-on-ones, and one of them there was no defense out there. He just ran a 15-yard post. He threw it 15 feet over his head. I'm like, there's no way. He's a great athlete, big arm, all of those things, but you can't. There's nothing you can like the accuracy. So completely wrong. He figured it out. But I'm not pushing back on the platform and getting their feet right, but I'll never forget, and I think it was Eli Manning who actually said this, that he would believe during pro days or, when these coaches come and see these players, these workouts are so scripted that they have these nice pockets, they step into everything, that to get a more accurate depiction on how accurate a quarterback is, have them throw off platform all the time and see if he can make those throws, because so many, and granted, Patrick Mahomes is a unicorn, we understand this, but you watch Aaron Rodgers, you watch Josh Allen, or even Joe Burrow, he gets rid of the ball so quickly, but a lot of times these guys aren't able to step into their throw, or they're sliding a little bit. Now we see the extreme examples with Patrick Mahomes sprinting to his left, throwing back across his right, but even inside of that, it's one thing for a quarterback to step in and have a clean pocket and throw an accurate pass. It's another thing for their guys to be around him and have to slide one way, not step forward and kind of have both feet parallel as he throws and still throw an accurate pass. So it'll be interesting. And I wanted to ask you about that because of Anthony Richardson, but we've got a lot more to get to, and we are going to get this. We're going to talk to you about what you think the Chiefs are going to do. And I'm going to spend about 10 minutes talking to you about Deuce Vaughn, because I got into a Twitter conversation about.
Don't do that.
You think Anthony Richardson is polarizing within the relevant discussion of first round? Bring up Deuce Vaughn on social media, and some people think he's going to get drafted early day 3, and some people think he's never going to make it in the league. And I want to get your opinion on that, and we will and talk Chiefs right after this.
Whether you're a Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, KC Current, K-State, KU, or Mizzou fan, we've got you covered. Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
Kansas City, the NFL draft is almost here. It's a fantastic time for our city. Make sure you're staying locked into us here at KC Sports Network, because we've got the draft covered. Chiefs have 10 picks. We'll see how many they actually use, but there's one selection that every football fan can share, and that's an ice-cold Miller Lite. The players change, the coaches change, the rules change, but Miller Lite is still the perfect beer for draft time, game time, and everything in between. Personally, when I want a beer with some flavor, but it's also light and won't make me feel bad, Miller Lite has been a go-to. It's light on calories, not taste. What's the point of drinking beer if you can't taste it? Till kickoff comes around again, enjoy the beer that tastes like the season. Miller Lite, great taste, 96 calories. To get Miller Lite delivered right to your door, visit MillerLite.com/KCSN, or you can pick up some Miller Lite pretty much anywhere they sell beer. It's Miller time. Celebrate responsibly. Miller Brewing Company, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 96 calories and 3.2 carbs per 12 ounces. All right, welcome back to the KCSN Draft Show. BJ Kissel hanging out with ESPN's Matt Miller. We just spent the first segment talking quarterbacks in the top 10, any surprises within the quarterback realm, quarterback space that we may see, and how that top 10 may shake out. And Matt, before we talk about the Chiefs, I do want to get your thoughts on this, because you mentioned earlier our good friend Peter King had come out. I think this happens every year where some national media comes out and they talk with some GMs, they talk with some scouts who are kind of consuming all of the mock drafts and all the media stuff that's put out there. And they say something to the effect of, there are going to be some surprises because our board is completely different than what we're seeing. I know it is your job to make sure that you are not off in the way that Peter is reporting that they're saying that some media people are. But is there anything that you kind of disagree with the masses on as it relates to your board or a couple of players that are either projected much higher than you think they're going to go, or vice versa?
Yeah, I think so. I'll start with wide receiver Jackson Smith and Jigba. I have him as my number 5 overall player. And when I look at mock drafts, you really start to see him come off the board around pick 12 for some people. I've seen mock drafts where he comes up the board in the 20s, and I don't get it. And even I do a ton of stuff with the guys at ESPN, Mel Kiper, Todd McShay, and they disagree with me on it. They have him in the teens, and I'm like, what am I missing? This guy is a great route runner, 6'1", 200 pounds. He has legendary short shuttle 3-cone times, and he never drops the ball. So it kind of makes you question yourself a little bit of wait, what are they seeing that I'm not, or what am I not seeing that it's the weird vice versa. But
then you remind you
JSN guy.
And then you remind yourself that you're pretty good at projecting.
I feel like
Ohio State wide receiver, wide receiver, especially from Ohio State, you've been pretty good at over the years.
Yeah,
just I do.
And so I'll say, a lot of our job is watching tape. We've hung out. You know how much that is my job. But it's also, and I think the further along you get in this career, you make new connections, you make more connections, and your job becomes about also collecting information. And sometimes you're able to report that information. Sometimes you use it as background for your own thoughts. But I'm comfortable saying this. Brian Hartline, who is the best wide receiver coach in the world, now he's the offensive coordinator at Ohio State, but he's been the wide receiver coach there for a minute, and they're good at that position. He has told me, hey, JSN is better. He was better than Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave when they were here together. And he has gone as far as to say you could throw Scary Terry in there, pick an Ohio State wide receiver in the last 10 years. He's putting JSN above those guys. Now, that doesn't include Marvin Harrison Jr.
I was going to say, that will change.
Marvin,
same thing.
Right. But, so I also so I trust my eyes, but then I talk to people like Coach Hartline, who has nothing to gain by saying he's the best, Sometimes Urban Meyer was notorious for doing that. He'd be like, this is the best tight end I've ever evaluated. But or coached, and he'd say it every year. So it's okay, cool. But when somebody says no, I'm willing to put this guy above those two receivers, one which is the offensive rookie of the year, the other, could have been, that helps, I think it backs up your belief a little bit. So JSN is the one where I am much higher on him than I guess everyone else. The guy I'm lower on, that is a good question. I don't think Will Levis should be a top 10 pick. And we talked about it in this episode. I like Will, and I hope he does well. But to me, the tape doesn't say top 5 pick or top 10 pick. I understand the nature of the position. Guys are going to float up the board a little bit. That's probably the biggest one, that I see where I'm gosh, this is going to be a hard one to kind of explain on. Thankfully, I don't have to explain at draft night when he gets picked. I'm not up yet, so it's I'll let those guys handle that one.
And you mentioned something there that I think is really important. It's an important distinction, and I talked about this with Kent, Matt, and Craig regarding their content quite a bit. Are you putting together content based on what you think is going to happen and what you're hearing, or what you would do if you were a GM, a pure, I'm an evaluator, this is how I see these guys shaking out. And when you get information that differs from your own evaluation, I know for you go back and do the work and say, okay, what did I miss here? You go back and rewatch them. It's okay for people's opinions to change based on information they're getting. You go back, you see something differently, you find out back around. Yeah. If you see you see a few games where a player really struggles, and those are the games that you focus on. Those games you evaluate, you go back and talk to an area scout or a GM who has the information, who shares, hey, he was banged up during that stretch and was playing through some stuff. And so, yeah, he's going to look slower. He's going to look not as explosive because he was at 75% or whatever the reason. There were things really going on in their lives that could affect their play. So a lot of that stuff that the outside world doesn't know. When you're putting together like your board, how much of a balance is it between what you're hearing and what you're projecting will happen and what you would do if you were in charge of these 32 NFL franchises?
So I never anymore, I don't do here's what I would do, unless it is like explicitly assigned to me by an editor and we very, very clearly lay that out. It's like, here's what I would do mock draft. So those really, I don't really do those anymore because it gets confusing for people. So I will say my big board, my rankings was I put those out yesterday, Wednesday. So you can go ESPN.com or look on my social media. It's tagged for 370 players or something like that. That is based on my evaluation with information from scouts on, hey, like here's, an injury that you didn't know about or an off-field thing you didn't know about. But a mock draft is all information, which is why, I have to turn in my final mock draft 1 week from today. So it will be a week old when the draft happens. And that is like terrifying. That is your worst nightmare because information changes so fast, that you would love to be able to put one out the morning of, but it's not really practical in a digital age to do that. So mock draft is 97% what you're hearing. And then a big board is 100%, this is how I evaluate these guys, which is why you'll see the discrepancies, of like Bijan Robinson is my number 3 overall player. He will not be drafted at number 3, so that's kind of, I think a big board is your way to put your stamp on players that you like, and obviously we're not drafting for schemes or specific team fit. It's, hey, if I just had to line these guys up, 1 to 400, who are the best players in the class, this is how you would do it.
All right, let's pivot here to the Chiefs. We're 27 minutes in, and this is a Chiefs channel. People want to know about the Chiefs as well. We've been talking about the draft and Chiefs for the last few weeks, so trying to mix it up at the beginning of the show here, what's going on across the league. But let's focus on the Chiefs now. And I think the consensus, at least from the media, those of us on the outside, is the Chiefs are going to go in one of probably 3 areas with their first 3 picks, or especially with that first pick, whether it's offensive tackle, whether it's wide receiver, or edge rusher, defensive end, depending upon who falls. Do you agree with that kind of consensus based on what you're hearing or what you think about this draft? And of those 3 positions, which one do you think the best case scenario would be for the Chiefs with pockets of guys falling? Based on just kind of how guys are going to shake out. Because if you're going to use the first 3 picks on those, you want to kind of guess, okay, where are the pockets of players that we like at these positions? And that could kind of dictate what you do with the first round because you're more comfortable with wide receivers in the second or tackles in the second or edge rushers, whatever it is. How do you kind of see in those 3 positions play out as it relates to the Chiefs with the number 31 overall pick?
Yeah, like you said, it makes it hard when you're looking at 31. I will say this, I feel confident the receivers are going to be later first-round picks than early first-round picks. So I think, last year, if we had talked about this, we would have said, hey, if you want a starting corner, you're probably going to have to go up a little bit. They did. And they were able to kind of, predict the Karlaftis slide a little bit. So
they got one in the 7th round, too, for big fair. Jalen Watson in the 7th was
exactly right.
Come on.
So I would look at it like sitting here right now, having a decent idea of like at least what position teams will go after. I think at 31, you've got a very good chance to get a wide receiver. Decent chance to get a pass rusher. I think it gets harder because with pass rusher, there are so many small guys this year, and that is just not something that Steve Spagnuolo has used. These sub 240 pass rushers and maybe he changes things, but this is not what they've done. Karlaftis was considered small for them last year when they drafted him. So I have a hard time with that, whether it's Will McDonald or BJ Ojolari. It's hard for me to look at those guys and say, you fit the Chiefs. So I think wide receiver, maybe pass rusher. Your guy King Felix, I think is closer to a body type fit. Keon White is closer to a body type fit. If they both should be there. I feel like that's a comfortable range for them. Right tackle is really interesting, BJ, because Darnell Wright from Tennessee will not be there at 31. Like, if that's what you're holding out hope for, it's just not going to happen. He might not make it out of the top 13 picks. There's a drop-off at tackle after him, left or right tackle. I think you start to get into the range of, you're looking at guys like DeJuan Jones from Ohio State. And, the reviews on him from the interview cycle have not been positive. So, he's a monster. He's 6'8", 370 pounds. It's like, there's no one else built like that other than the left tackle you guys just let walk. So, it gets a little bit harder to find a true right tackle where you're not making a projection of, okay, can we move this guy over? I mean, there are players, there's, Cody Mouse from North Dakota State. Like, yeah, he can play right tackle. Absolutely. But it's going to be a transition. You could look at Matthew Bergeron from Syracuse, who's a great run blocker. Like, oh yeah, he can play right tackle, but it's going to be a bit of an adjustment. So I would say if it were my, I guess, like dream Chiefs draft, I would say, wide receiver at 31, like Quentin Johnston would be my guy. I think you go round 2 pass rusher. And I'll be honest, I don't have the Chiefs pick numbers pulled up in front of me, but I think you can find a
63. And that's, and just to give you, so when I did the mock draft, and I learned a lot of these players as I did, like we did with you 2 weeks ago, the best case scenario mock draft for the Chiefs. And we got to the second round, and I did last week with Trevor Sikkema, our buddy from Pro Football Focus. And he was speaking of the kid from Louisville, Diaby. Well, wasn't familiar with
Diaby.
Derek Hall, KJ Henry from Clemson, King Felix, if he can drop a little bit. There's so many. King Felix is a perfect example of, one of the 55 players that are projected in the first round that somebody's going to fall into the second round. So it seems like, at least, again, this is from the media consensus, that if you're looking for an edge rusher, that there could be that number 63 pick, maybe a sweet spot for a guy, again, Derek Hall, Diaby, King Felix, like a lot of those kinds of guys.
Derek Hall was who I was going to say, actually. That's a good one.
That fit well with with what Spagnuolo likes. I know when we went before, and I think it was more value, you had projected Will McDonald to the Chiefs. A little bit older, a little bit more wiry than they're used to, but at some point you just take the talent. It's like Nolan Smith. He's not going to be there, but he might not fit. He might not be prototypical, but sometimes somebody, it's at that point you figure it out. And Steve Spagnuolo is creative enough that might not fit the mold, but you find a way to utilize a talent like that. And luckily the Chiefs are in a position with the Omenihu signing and some of the other guys they have on that roster and some veteran free agents that didn't sign before the draft, because of they don't want to sign for more than $2 million and affect the compensatory pick formula. And some of those guys just don't want to go to phase 1. They don't want to go work out. Right. They don't want to do OTAs and all these things. So they're going to wait. And so we could see some veteran signings after the draft that kind of solidify some of these other positions. Some of that stuff may be already set. They say, hey, we'll sign you after the draft. We'll see how it shakes out. But I want to ask you about tackles specifically. How many tackles do you have going in the first round? Because you mentioned DeJuan Jones. So Darnell Wright won't be there. Anton Harrison has been a popular name that Chiefs fans have been talking about. Broderick Jones, another name that Chiefs fans have been talking about. How many do you project to go in the first round? And knowing the Chiefs have 10 picks, they don't have 10 spots on their roster. I'd be shocked if they walked away with more than 7 players. Like 7.5 to me is kind of how many players do you think the Chiefs walk away with this draft? If I had set an over-under, I'd set it at 7.5. Tackle would make sense if you get up into the early mid-20s to move up and get a guy. But again, how many do you project going? And who do you see that kind of early 20s mark being if the Chiefs were going to trade up? What's that pocket for a tackle to go right there?
Yeah, I have 4 projected right now. And I haven't run all the way through this mock draft that's due in a week. So it could be 5. I think it's likely, that a 5th will float up. 4.5. I know what the over-under is. 4.5 would be probably right where I would put it. So Peter Skronsky comes off, Broderick Jones. I don't think Broderick makes it to 31. I've seen, I get tweets from like Cowboys fans too, who are like, hey, will Broderick Jones make it to 26? Probably not, guys.
His tape is so fun. His tape is so, for an offensive lineman, it's so fun to watch.
Man, he just puts dudes in the ground. He's fun. Paris Johnson, Ohio State, he's going to be gone. Darnell Wright, Tennessee, he will be gone. So I think you're looking at, and you guys aren't unique here. There are a lot of teams, and even in the 20s, where it's like, hey, offensive line's an area of need for those teams. So you mentioned Anton Harrison, Oklahoma. He could get pulled up a little bit. After that, for me, there's a drop off. I'm not the biggest DeJuan Jones fan. I know some folks are because of his size. I also look at Matt DeBurger on Syracuse. I like him a lot. Kind of the sleeper of that group is Wanya Morris from Oklahoma. He is a right tackle who played both sides, very athletic in the run game. Someone who probably like a late 2, early 3 type pick, but that's more due to I think the injury than talent. Blake Freeland from BYU, I know it's a popular Chiefs name because of the BYU connections that are there in the organization, and he's very, very athletic as well. So there, like I would say, 8 to 9 tackles in the first 2 rounds is pretty realistic right now.
Yeah, if I was a betting person, and I am, I would take offensive tackle for the Chiefs at some point, whether they move up for him or not. And I think the sub storyline for tackle is going to be interesting, and I know it's going to be the question, the narrative. If they take a tackle in the first round, especially one that played left tackle in college, that you're taking a left tackle, say 4-year starter at left tackle, and you're going to put him at right tackle, and then you're going to take a guy who's played right tackle the last 4 years and put him at left tackle. It's like, wouldn't it ideally work out? I know the contract that Juwan Taylor signed, and I know what they've said, but from a coaching, and not that Andy Heck can't switch those guys, but then you have 2 guys learning new positions, protecting the edges for Patrick Mahomes. And we saw those guys, for as well as Andrew Wiley played, especially when it mattered late in the season. Throughout the regular season, there were a lot of pressures that were given up, and most of those pressures weren't the interior guys that were coming off the edge. And that's a lot more work put on Andy Heck and the Chiefs offensive staff to get 2 tackles comfortable at positions they haven't played for the last 4 years. So if it were me, I would rather put them where they're comfortable, especially where Juwan Taylor has proven to be one of the best players. If you can get a left tackle that you're comfortable with.
Even if you're paying Taylor, what is it? Is it 25? Is that I don't even know.
It's 20 a year. He's like $60 million guaranteed.
20 a year.
He gets $60 million.
Okay. If you're paying him 20 to play right tackle, but you're paying your left tackle rookie money, it all evens out. It's like, how much money do we have for offensive tackles? Okay, it'll even out. It's still probably less than they offered Orlando Brown Jr. and he said no to. Let's just say that.
If Juwan Taylor goes and plays well at right tackle at $20 million a year and they win a couple of Super Bowls during his time, his value is not going to be any lower, becoming a free agent again in 3 years in his prime to get paid again. I know that kind of thoughts been out there. We got paid to be a left tackle. I'm like, yeah, he already got paid. He signed the contract. He's getting that money. Right now, go win some Super Bowls and, improve your stock even more by protecting the greatest quarterback we've ever seen. And speaking of greatest quarterback we've ever seen, I'm excited about the potential for a third down back like Deuce Vaughn to be somebody who throws the plateau. It's become like a Kenny McIntosh, Deuce Vaughn. The Chiefs need a third down back. Jerick McKinnon is still a free agent, hasn't re-signed. Maybe they have a plan for him to sign after the draft, but if not, the Chiefs need a third down back. And we are going to talk with Matt about Deuce Vaughn and the Chiefs third down back situation right after this break.
Whether you're a Chiefs, Royals, Sporting KC, KC Current, K-State, KU, or Mizzou fan, we've got you covered. Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, proudly presented by Emprise Bank.
What's up, Chiefs Kingdom? This is BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network. With Kansas City on full display for the NFL Draft, what better way to celebrate our hometown than by supporting a charity that helps kids with special needs in our own backyard? Children's Center for the Visually Impaired will host the CCVI Trolley Run Sunday, April 30th to change the lives of students who are blind or have low vision. Now in its 35th year, the CCVI Trolley Run is a 4-mile race that finishes on the Country Club Plaza the Sunday after the NFL Draft. This fundraiser is open to everyone and no athletic ability is required. Enjoy free beer after the race and snacks from local restaurants. We promise the KC community will be on full display. Visit trolleyrun.org and use code KCSN to get a few extra bucks off your registration. That's trolleyrun.org. Welcome back to the KCSN Draft Show. BJ Kissel hanging out with Matt Miller. We've talked tackles. We've talked top 10 in general with the quarterbacks and what that could mean for the rest of the draft. And now, Matt, because I had the conversation on social media and I brought up that the ceiling that I would feel comfortable taking Deuce Vaughn for the Chiefs is 4th round 122. And that set off a storm of people being like, absolutely, most of those were K-State fans. And everybody being like, this guy's not draftable. He is way too small. And so I want to get your thoughts on this, but the context of this is the Chiefs don't have a third down back right now. I think that's the sweet spot for Clyde Edwards-Helaire, who I would expect to stay on this team this year. He's in the last year of his contract. You only save a few $100,000 by cutting him, and you carry, I think it's like $900,000 in dead cap by keeping him. So from a financial standpoint, you have a motivated player. It makes sense to keep him for that reason and kind of be the backup to Isaiah Pacheco. Well, Chiefs need a third down back. Jerick McKinnon's still a free agent. No, he's tweeted out his frustrations about not having signed yet. So you go into this draft looking for a third down back, and you look at the way in which Jerick McKinnon was used, catching the ball out of the backfield, making explosive plays in the passing game, and providing a little spark when needed, and been a great player for the Chiefs. Now, Jerick McKinnon, even at his size, is still 25, maybe 15, 20 pounds heavier than Deuce Vaughn. But first, evaluation of Deuce Vaughn as a player, and then we'll talk fit and third down backs and how important things like pass cover or pass protection are in the grand scheme of drafting a player for that specific position. And I understand this would be a luxury pick. I understand it's not a perfect fit, but I watched the dude enough to know there's not a more explosive player in the open field that could catch a ball and make something happen in that position than Deuce Vaughn.
I think starting with Deuce, obviously, the production and durability are the first things to jump out, to be a 4-year player, productive. Secondly is that he's 5'5", 180 pounds. So you're kind of wrestling immediately with, God, this production is fantastic. As a runner and a receiver, this production is fantastic. He's 5'5", so it's like, it's this yin and yang a little bit with evaluating him. He is draftable, and he is capable of carving out a really nice role for himself in the NFL as a runner, receiver, returner. That's his niche. And I think sometimes we get so short-sighted and we have to reprogram ourselves. When we think of running backs, we still think, oh, a guy's 20 carries a game, 25 carries a game. That isn't real anymore. That doesn't exist outside of Derrick Henry, really. So it's more about, if we're going to give this guy 12 to 15 carries, that's our lead back. We're going to give this guy 7 to 8 touches, that's the second, and then we're probably got, five touches for this other guy. That's what you're talking about is, can you come in and be the 5-touch guy? Can you be the spark guy? And so I always look at it from a perspective of, ask a player to do what they're good at, and then teach them to do the things they're not. So when you talk about Deuce Vaughn, okay, 5'5", 180 pounds. Well, he's not your goal line back, right? It's like, okay, don't ask him to do that. He's not good at running between the tackles. Cool, don't ask him to do it. What is he good at? Operating in space, catching the ball. He's lined up in the slot. Okay, well, let's look at this offense specifically. Is there a precedent for that? Yes, we just saw last year, Jerick McKinnon was arguably the second best receiver on the team behind Travis Kelce. So, yeah, there's a precedent here. And so that's the way that I evaluate players, BJ, is what are they good at? Okay, what are they not good at? And are those things correctable? Like we talked about with Anthony Richardson. Okay, Deuce is small. We can't change that, right? So throw that part out. But the things that he's really good at, do they fit your football team? And for Kansas City, they do fit that football team. And there might be 5 teams in the NFL that he's a fit on because of scheme use and what they would ask him to do and that it's in the playbook. But he fits that. And so, 4th round is rich for me. I think you could get him later. It's not to say he's not valuable and that he's not a good player. Maybe his talent is 4th round, but his size is 5th round. So, okay, well, let's just get this really good player in the 5th round instead. But I would love to see him in an offense where, hey, let's find a way to get this guy 5 touches. Hell, they did it for Meatgoal. Hey, we're going to force feed this guy the ball and see what happens. I think you can do it at the same level here.
After I put it out and I was going back and forth with people, and I agreed that if they take him in the 4th, that's the highest point at which I'd be like, okay, because of the usage and because I know how important Jerick McKinnon was. And just putting in this context, if you could draft the next Jerick McKinnon to make the same kind of impact, what value would you put him in this draft? To me, 4th round. I would take a third down back in Andy Reid's offense in the 4th round. After I was going back and forth with people, I called Kent Swanson. I'm telling you this. I called him. I talked for 20 minutes on the phone. I was in Manhattan walking around a trail, and I was like, am I off here? What am I missing? What are your thoughts? And he's not as high. He said, 5th, 6th round. He's not as high on Deuce Vaughn as obviously I am, but understood where I was coming from. And the one argument or kind of point that he brought up that I said, you know what? That's a phenomenal point, is if your third down back can't be a gunner or play other special teams, is the there for a player that maybe it's maybe it's 10 to 12, maybe 10 to 15 snaps a game for that player on offense. And that's the only value you're getting out of him when, on game days, your third running back or your backup running back, they have to play special teams, or the rest of the roster's got to be really strong. So would Dave Toub, is there a use for him anywhere outside of that very specific argument? I'm like, you know what? That I understand. From an offensive standpoint, you can't convince me that guy wouldn't be an absolute threat and a nightmare for defenses to have to account for in an Andy Reid offense. He's more people were comparing him to Clyde Edwards-Helaire coming out. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, we have not. I was high on Clyde coming out, especially his ability to catch the ball to the backfield because of his lateral agility, the screen game with the Chiefs. We haven't seen that for 3 years.
Yeah, it disappeared. Yeah.
Thought this would be a bigger part of it. Is it the injury? Is it the explosion? But one thing that I've said with Clyde, and I will say this about Kenny McIntosh, and I want to get your thoughts on other guys in this draft. Kenny McIntosh, phenomenal player, huge production. It bothers me that every time I would watch him, and I was watching melts and highlights of him, the last guy always tackled him. He was from behind. That making that last safety miss was something. You watch Clyde Edwards-Helaire in college. Huge production on the greatest offenses we've seen in college football. He was getting caught behind. He didn't have that breakaway for touchdown speed. Deuce Vaughn was not caught from behind. That last guy did not tackle him. And that's what bothers. Like, Kenny McIntosh come in to be a great player, find a specific role for him. I like him as a player, but it bothered me, and I kept watching all these highlights that he'd have a 20-yard run, and then he couldn't make the last safety miss. And it happened like a dozen times. It wasn't a couple. It happened a lot. Knowing that.
4.62 shows up,
Oh, yeah. Well, Deuce Vaughn not caught from behind. So if it's not Deuce Vaughn, I'd take my K-State bias off and just say, you know what? Somebody else. Who's a good guy in this draft that's not Kenny McIntosh, not Deuce Vaughn, that could be taken on Saturday to fit that very specific niche role for the Chiefs and maybe provide more on special teams than my guy 22 from K-State?
Man, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if there is anyone that's very specific to Kansas City. There will be running backs drafted on day 3 who are good players, absolutely. But I think specific to this role that you're talking about, I don't know if there is anyone. And maybe it's just because I haven't slept in a week, and so their name's not coming to the forefront.
There's an East Carolina kid that people have been talking about, and then the big popular one is McIntosh. He's the one that a lot of people bring up, and it's a lot of football fans know him. He played at Georgia, put up huge production on a team that's always been good, always playing in championship games.
So, yeah. And especially because you said day 3. So, okay, I haven't had coffee today yet in his draft, 2 weeks for the draft. So Devin Achane from A&M, he'll be gone. I would think he's the dream fit. That's who you want to be there, but he's probably going to be gone. Tyjae Spears from Tulane, other than Deuce, Tyjae Spears from Tulane, I think is a fit. He's probably going to go early 4th. Tank Bigsby from Tulane, or Tank Bigsby from Auburn, similar, probably 4th round. The one, if Zach Evans, that's what I would ask. Watch Zach Evans, some TCU, watch some of the Ole Miss. He was the number 1 running back in the country, and they're ahead of Bijan Robinson in the recruiting class. There was some drama about where he was going to go. He ends up at TCU, is really good for 2 years, goes to Ole Miss, actually got lost in the shuffle at Ole Miss. The talent is absolutely there. So I would say he's a fit. If you want pure speed, Keaton Mitchell from East Carolina. That dude's a legit 4.3 running back. So I'm sorry, there are guys. I needed some.
It's okay.
Slap myself in the face.
Forgive you. I just want to know your Deuce Vaughn take anyway. So I'm still.
I'm not going to be as hot as you are on a guy that just ran all over us for 4 years. No.
You know what? I got to shout out Texas. Deshaun Jameson and Keandre Coburn were 2 of my favorite interviews at the Shrine Bowl. Those dudes were fun to talk to. And I love the fact that I asked every dude out there, and we'll wrap up the show with this story. I asked everybody out there that played in the Big 12, asked the TCU guys, asked Trey Hodges Tomlinson, and then asked Coburn and Deshaun Jameson, asked a KU dude that was out there, what season would you rather have? The season that TCU had, where you get to go play in the national title, you don't technically win anything, or the season that K-State had, where you still get to go play the Sugar Bowl, you play Alabama, and you're Big 12 champs. You get a ring, you get a trophy. What season would you rather have? It was pretty split, but I believe both Texas guys said they would have rather had K-State season. because they can call themselves
Yes,
Big 12.
for Texas, winning the Big 12 is the goal, right? It's like, hey, if you win the Big 12, you got to do that first. Also, I would not want to get embarrassed on national television like TCU did. Sorry.
Yeah. K-State didn't show out. They started hot against Alabama, and Deuce had longest run against the Alabama defense in Nick Saban's tenure, which is not nothing. But yeah,
right.
I mean, I'm biased on this one, but I'd rather be able to call myself a champion in that regard. There were a couple guys that they just like the experience of going and playing in the national title and being on that stage, regardless of the result. They get the experience and get to remember that for the rest of their lives, tell their grandkids about like they played in a national title game, which is something. Yeah. And they can tell those stories while K-State, they can show the trophy ring runs. Yeah, exactly. Right. So, all right. We appreciate everybody for hanging out in this episode of the KCSN Draft Show. Make sure to check out the KC Laboratory. Those guys are going live tonight. They're 2 weeks out from the draft. Make sure to check out their draft guide. I believe it's just $15. You get 3 months to the KCSN Substack as well if you sign up for that. And those guys have done a phenomenal job. So make sure to please.
I got one.
Work.
Chat and Crew. Great. It's great.
There you go.
One every year.
Chief specific draft guide. There's 3 draft guide. I always obviously read your stuff. Get the KCSN draft guide, PFF draft guide, and then obviously Dane Brugler's Beast. Always make sure to check that out too. But Matt, man, we appreciate you for hanging out with us, and make sure to check out Matt's work at ESPN as we get ready for the draft. And he'll be in Kansas City, just making the 2-hour trip up north from his hometown to come up here and cover it. But we appreciate all of you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching this production of KC Sports Network, the fastest growing sports media network in Kansas City. Check out these videos that feature our team of more than 15 former players, insiders, and analysts bringing you the best Chiefs coverage you can find. Entertain, educate, inform. KC Sports Network.